Are you looking to update or replace your old oak cabinets? If so, I'm glad you're here. Replacing your old good cabinets can cost you thousands of dollars, and they generally lead to unexpected repairs. I made this video to show you how you can transform your old good cabinets and make them look like new again. Hey guys, it's the Chad, and I've seen so many people waste so much time and money on replacing their good old cabinets for something new because they're either ugly or outdated. Now, most of these new replacement cabinets are very expensive, they're poorly built, and they generally use inferior materials than they used to. If you can just visualize what your old cabinets might look like with a fresh coat of paint, you're going to save thousands of dollars, a lot of headaches, and if you're anything like me, you're going to be very proud of the work that you did. If you guys haven't realized from my previous videos, I'm cheap. I like to make old things look like new again. When it came to remodeling our house, there's no way I could afford to replace all the cabinets in the entire house, let alone just the kitchen. Now, we could have just chose to replace the doors and the drawer fronts, but that's still a lot of money, and most of the time they're made of MDF or just junk wood. If your cabinets are structurally in good shape, you should save them. If you guys have a little bit of time and follow my easy steps, you can transform your old cabinets that look like this into looking like that. Well, if you're still here, that means you're gonna go for it, and good for you. Now, some of the things you're gonna need for this transformation are gonna be as easy as a screwdriver. You're gonna need a way to take the cabinet doors, hinges, pulls, handles, all those things off. Once you get those off, you're gonna need either a TSP powder or a TSP liquid substitute. TSP stands for trisodium phosphate. Yeah, that's a big one. But what we do is mix it with some hot water, and that's what we're gonna scrub our cabinets with. We're trying to get all those years of grease, grime, and gunk off of it. Once those dry, then we're gonna need some type of sandpaper, or I like using these foam sanding blocks. Now we're just trying to level everything back out, get any urethane or old stain off of those doors before we move on. After that, you're gonna need some drywall mud or compound, whatever you wanna call it. Now, you don't need a 5-gallon bucket of this stuff. It's just what I have on hand. Probably a quart will do an entire kitchen or more, and then some type of putty knife. Then you're gonna need some type of primer, and I generally use an oil-based primer for this. Now, I like it because it goes on thin, dries fast, and it's sandable, but it stinks something fierce. Now, if your only option is to do this indoors, I'd probably look at going with a water-based primer. But if you can do it outside or in a garage, I'll show you why I like this oil-based so much more. And then we're gonna need to finish it up with some type of paint. And generally, I'm gonna go with more of a high-end paint like Sherwin Williams Pro Classic or a Benjamin Moore, but it's kind of whatever your budget allows. But I always choose to use a water-based acrylic. Now, I know we were using oil-based before, but I like to top coat it with water-based, and that's perfectly acceptable. It'll adhere fine. And then you need to make a decision. Are you gonna go through and put new pulls, handles, hinges, any of those things on? If that's not in the budget, I'm gonna show you guys how you can scuff up your old ones and just paint those too. So let's go out to the garage and get started. So now we're out in the garage and we're getting ready to start cleaning up our cabinet doors. But before you guys get started and demolish your entire kitchen by taking all the cabinet doors, the drawers out, be realistic. There's no way that you're gonna complete this project in just a weekend. My recommendation is you only pull like 2 to 4 doors off at a time, get those completed, and then move on to the next section. Now, the first thing that we need to do is get all the hardware off any of your doors. Now, these doors just have hinges. If you have any pulls or knobs, take those off. Now, I'm gonna elect to save these. It just depends what your budget's like. If you don't have the money to go out and buy brand new hardware, then I'll scuff these up later and show you how to paint them and make them look like new as well. So now, after you have all the hardware off and put in a bag, the next thing you need to do is actually label your cabinet doors or drawers. Now, when we take these off the wall, we can put painter's tape or masking tape and actually a number on it, but we're gonna be out here now washing these and sanding them down, so we have to have something more permanent. So I get a permanent marker, and where the hinges were covering the actual wood, this is where I label my doors or on the inside of my drawers. So now that we've got everything labeled, the next step is gonna be to start cleaning all the doors, drawer faces, and the actual cabinet boxes itself. We talked about that you can use a TSP liquid or TSP granules. I like to use the granules because it's a little more abrasive than the liquid itself. All I do is get a rag and I mix my TSP into hot water, and then I'm just gonna come through and start scrubbing these off. Now, there's gonna be a lot of grease and grime on these over the years. If it's pretty gross, you can actually come through with a scrub brush, just an old kitchen brush, and really start cleaning. Then we're gonna flip them over and do the other side. So next thing I do is I just take a towel or an old shirt, dry rag, something. I'm just gonna try to get all this solution off of it. So now I've got another bowl of fresh water, and the same thing. I'm just gonna get me a nice clean rag, go through and wipe it down another time. Make sure you wash your rag out quite a few times. Then come back with another fresh dry towel, rag, shirt, whatever you got. Let's get as much standing water out. Try to get anything out of the cracks that you can. If you guys have access to an air compressor, we can blow this out. And these work really good because we can get all the water out of any of the grooves blown out of there quickly. If not, maybe if you even have a leaf blower or something like that, that you can use some high-speed wind, that'll really help. It's a nice sunny day out today. Once I blow these out, I'm gonna let them go sit in the sun and completely dry out. Now that we have everything dried out, we can begin sanding. Now your cabinets more than likely are gonna have some type of polyurethane or varnish top coat on it to protect it. Now this is pretty slippery material and we're not gonna get good adhesion if we just go straight to primer. So we do need to sand it down. Now you can choose if you wanna use traditional sandpaper, a foam sanding block, or if you have a palm sander, I like using these. I'd be careful using a orbital sander that spins because you put a lot of striations and you can dig into the wood itself and leave a lot of marks, which isn't gonna be very pretty when you go to top coat it with paint. We're just gonna go through and just start sanding. I always like to sand in the direction of the wood grain. But again, we're just trying to scuff this up so we have good adhesion. Now some of the areas of these doors are going to be pretty hard to get to with a power sander, so you are going to have to come in with either sandpaper or sanding sponge. Like I said, the ultimate goal is to get all these smooth areas scuffed up. That way our paint or primer will stick in the end. So now we need to go back and clean our cabinet doors off again. If you have an air compressor, this really makes fast work of things. But all this dust now is deep into the grain of the oak, and we need to try to get that all out. But if you don't have a compressor, you can try to go through and get a cheesecloth or a tack cloth. And that's kind of got a little stick to it and actually help you pull some of this dust out of the grooves. So now that we've got everything sanded down, you can see how deep the grains are in oak, and it's pretty wavy. So the next step is going to be trying to hide some of this wood grain. Now I want to show you guys how to hide the deep oak wood grain in these cabinet doors. Now I've used a lot of products over the years trying these out. This is a Bondo, all-purpose Bondo, kind of like a body filler for cars. Now this works great if you're trying to fill like some type of holes where handles used to be. It gets super hard and it dries pretty fast. But if you're gonna try to skim coat or use this to hide the wood grain, you're gonna need a power sander because it is so hard. Another product that I've used is a water-based material called Aqua Coat. And it's kind of like a wax, and you put it on with a putty knife or like a credit card, and it hides the wood grain well, and it's like glass when it dries, but you need about 7,400 coats of it. It's just not a product I would use to fill in this deep wood grain because it takes so much time. Now my go-to material is gonna be drywall mud. Now this is readily available to anybody and it's cheap. Now this works really good, it dries fast, and you don't need any special tools. So we're gonna do a little experiment. We're gonna take one of our cabinet doors and we're gonna use our drywall mud or compound and start filling in all the wood grain. It's gonna take us a little bit of time because we're gonna need several coats to hide this wood grain, and then we're gonna leave another cabinet door bare. Now we'll still prime it and top coat it with paint, but I wanna show you guys how much better this looks once you fill the wood grain versus just painting a cabinet. So to get started with your drywall mud, you just need to go through and get your putty knife or drywall knife. Get your little drywall mud on here. You don't need a ton, don't put too much on here. And then you're gonna work in the direction of the wood grain. I just come in here and put nice thin coat on here. You don't have to be really careful. I just try not to get it into the grooves because it gets harder to sand out that way. You can already see that I'm filling those grooves in already. So now that I've got everything covered, I want to go back through and all these big globs that ended up here, I want to try to wipe off. That way I don't have so much sanding to do when this dries. Now I've went through and got all the excess that were in the corners. Now when I do these doors, I mainly just work on the faces. I really don't care about the outside edges. You can do that if you want, if it's important. And then obviously there's no reason for me to do the backside because no one's gonna see that. So as we wait for our drywall mud to dry, yeah, that's what I mean. We're gonna go through and start cleaning up your hardware if you decide not to go new. Now, these hinges work really good. Nothing wrong with them. Same thing if there's any pulls or knobs. But we do need to scuff these up. That way we can get our paint to stick to them. So I've got all the hardware sanded down and wiped back off. Don't forget your screws. I took all my screws and shoved them into a piece of cardboard. That way I can spray paint the heads of those to match. Now, if you're not gonna keep your original hardware and you go with something new, be very careful that you buy something that has the same screw pattern. You don't want to go out and buy something that looks fancy, but then you have to re-drill everything out on your cabinets, your cabinet doors, and your drawers. It's a real pain. So I decided to paint all of our hardware black. I just ran down to Home Depot, bought a $1.50 can of flat black. Now you can choose what finish you want, matte or even semi, but we like that flat finish. So I'm just gonna go through, put a couple coats on. Don't put it on too thick the first time because you're gonna get a lot of runs. I'll let this dry for a little bit and then we'll apply the second coat. So our first coat of mud's all dried up. I put it out in the sun and that really accelerated how quick it dried. It usually takes overnight, but this was only about 2-3 hours. Now before I start sanding it with sandpaper, the sanding block, I come back in with my putty knife in any of the big areas of drywall where we have clumps or right in the corners of the edges. I like to try to scrape it out real quick. After you get all the edges and corners cleaned out, then get your sanding block or sandpaper, and we're gonna go through and take all the big chunks or any high spots. Again, sand with the direction of the grain. Now as you sand this, you don't want to take all the drywall mud off. You want to leave what's inside of the wood grain itself. That's what we're trying to fill, but we're just trying to take the big clumps off before we get to coat number 2. So in between coats, we need to come back now and clean all this drywall dust off. If you have a compressor, this is a good time to do it. Now you can see after just one coat of the drywall mud, how much of this wood grain's already filled in. But we're gonna go back with a second coat, just kind of a light skim coat, to go through and fill everything that we missed the first go around. So now I've just finished up with coat number 2, which will be my final coat. Now we'll let this sit outside and dry for several more hours and then we'll be ready to sand. Lucky enough, the sun's been shining all day and I've got both coats on and they're both dry already, so we'll get this done today. So we've got the second coat of drywall mud all sanded down, and you can just see how much mud has filled up this wood grain, and it is really smooth now. I've blown it off and we're gonna wipe it down one time with a damp cloth, and then we'll be ready for the oil-based primer. Now we've got the doors all cleaned up, they're prepped and ready for primer. Like I said before, I like to use an oil-based primer, and I generally use Zinsser Cover Stain. Now I like this because it dries super fast, it goes on thin, and I can sand it out in case there's any runs or imperfections. So to get started, you just need your paint tray or some kind of container. I like to start with the brush, and I go in and try to get into the grooves first. I don't have to be real careful. You don't want to have any runs, but start in with the brush and we can finish with the roller. I'm going to be able to sand any imperfections out once I get a coat or two of this on and it dries. I've got that done. I'm just going to go back with the foam roller. You can use any type of roller you like. I'm just going to start rolling it in. So I've got coat 1 of the oil-based primer on. We'll let it dry for a couple hours. If there's any high spots, I'll knock it down with a little sandpaper, and then we'll put the second coat on. So now coat 2's dry, so let's flip them over and do the other side. One thing that I didn't really cover very well was the importance of using a primer. Now, you can go through and just paint right over your existing finish of your cabinets, but you're probably gonna run into some problems down the road. Now, I like using an oil base, and I like this cover stain because when I put this on after I've sanded it down, it's not gonna allow that tannin or the natural wood color to bleed through the primer and then eventually your paint. That's what happens a lot of times when you paint these cabinets white, and then all of a sudden a couple years later, they start turning yellow or the wood grain showing through. So it is important not to skimp over this step and to use a good primer. Again, if all you can do is use a water base, it's still better than nothing. So I've got 2 coats of primer on the front and back of both of my doors here. And it does have a kind of a rough texture just due to using that foam roller. It's kind of hard to see. If you look in here, we're gonna have to knock that down with some sandpaper. I like using 220 grit sandpaper, and that's gonna make this sand down like glass. So now I've got everything sanded down. I'm just gonna take a wet paper towel or a wet cloth and go through and try to wipe these cabinets off one last time. Get them all cleaned up before we go through with the top coat. So once you get that done, just get a nice dry towel, shirt, cloth, whatever, and dry them back off. You're just trying to get that last bit of dust off of here before you paint it. So here's a quick look at the doors after we've got them primed. Now this is the one where we didn't use the drywall mud to fill in the wood grain. And the primer's done a pretty good job of filling a lot of it up. But here's the one that we did use the mud. And the faces of it look really good. So when it comes to the cabinet boxes themselves, I don't take the time to mud the faces of it because the doors hide the majority of it, and you probably won't ever notice it. I also don't go through and sand primer paint this front lip because we're always pulling dishes or cups, things across that, and it tends to scratch or chip very easily. So unless you like doing touch-ups, I just leave it alone. So when it comes to painting these doors and drawers, I prefer to use a paintbrush and a roller versus some other type of sprayer. The reason why is I usually only do 3 to 4 doors and drawers at a time because that's the space I have in my garage and usually what I can get done in a weekend. Now if you have several days off and you can convert your whole garage into a paint booth, using one of these HVLP sprayers or a full airless sprayer is a great way to knock out 20, 30 doors and drawers at a time. Now these sprayers are great because they can lay that paint down and it look like glass, but some of the downfalls are they waste a lot of paint. Some of the airless sprayers can take a half to 3/4 of a gallon just to fill the hose. Now you can go through and spray these doors in 2-3 minutes, but then you spend the next 20 minutes cleaning your machine out. Again, I like to use that paintbrush and roller because I use it, put it in a Ziploc bag, throw it in the fridge. A couple hours later, I come out and just use it again. But again, personal preference. So now we're ready for the paint. It's gonna be the same procedure. I'm gonna start off with my brush, start trimming everything out. If you guys are using a water base and your paint's fairly thick, you can go through and add a little bit of water, or you can add a product called Floetrol that's made by Flood, and that'll just thin out your water-based paint a little bit. So now we've got several coats of paint on the back of the cabinet doors. We've flipped them over and we're ready to start painting the faces. Now just the same as we did before, we'll get...
Can I paint?
Just a minute, hey. I'm trying to make this video real quick.
Why
Why don't you girls go play outside for a sec?
No, I would rather paint. Yeah, I would rather paint.
All right,
Please.
hold on. Hold on.
Because I really want to.
So like I said, same thing as the back side. You're gonna load up your paintbrush, go through and hit the edges with the brush, and then we'll come back with the roller. Now the front side's the important side. You need to make sure that you've got a smooth finish. So if your paint was going on too thick on the back, like I said, add a little Floetrol or add some water to your paint to thin it down. You might need 3 coats of paint instead of just 2 if it is thinned down a little bit, but I'd much rather have that 3rd coat as long as it lays down like glass. So if we come and take a closer look at our doors, the one here on the left, this is the one that we went through and applied the drywall mud to. Now, there is no wood grain left. The face is smooth. Whereas we come to the one on the right, and this is the one that we just used the primer and paint. Now, there's still quite a bit of wood grain exposed. The face is still pretty wavy, but it's not horrible. Now, I would definitely take the extra time to put a couple coats of drywall mud on. You definitely won't be disappointed. So that leads us to the next question. Should you go through and put some kind of protective finish over your new paint job, such as a polyurethane, a varnish, or some other type of material? Well, generally I would say no, because my kids are hard on everything, and it's not a big surprise for our doors or drawers to get scratches or chips in them. Now, I don't want to have to go through and sand down the doors completely to get that urethane off, just to make a small paint touch-up, and then have to go through and put another protective coat back on. I just like to go through and pull my paint can up, a little paintbrush, dab it on, and I'm finished. Another downfall of using a material such as polyurethane, which is oil-based, if you have white or lighter colored cabinets and you go through and put this on, it's going to tend to dry a yellowish color. Now you can go through and use a polycoat, which is a water-based material, and it's going to dry pretty clear. But adding a protective finish, that's just totally a personal preference. So now all the painting's done and it's time to go back and add our hardware. So I went ahead and got the paint all finished up on the hinges, the screws, and I am going to be adding some door pulls, these black ones. Now it's pretty important to me to do that because we have light colored cabinets now and you don't want to be putting dirty fingerprints all over them. Now these were real cheap off of Amazon. Now you can go through and buy these templates that helps you mark all your cabinet door pulls in the same spot, also for your drawers. You just go through, decide which hole you want to use, mark it with a pen or a pencil, pull it off, and then you just need to get your drill and drill the hole out. Now we'll go through and put all the rest of the hardware on. So now you're all finished up. You went through and painted your doors, drawers, and bases, got your hardware back on, and everything reinstalled. Here at our house, we went from a honey oak haven that used to look like that to a beautiful kitchen that looks like this. All for less than $150. Now we just didn't stop there. We went ahead and refinished our cabinets in the laundry room, the hallway, and the bathroom. If you guys know of other ways to rejuvenate your cabinets on the cheap, type it down in the old clickety-clack. And while you're there, smash the like button and subscribe. Now, if you guys have a little bit of time, a few bucks, and follow my easy steps, you can transform your cabinets that used to look like this into something that looks like that. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.